Behavior management strategies should be central to successful coaching to ensure that athletes receive high-quality coaching and the opportunity to reach their full potential. There are numerous reasons for the inappropriate behavior of athletes, and it is important that coaches minimize these behaviors and manage the coaching environment by employing a range of strategies. Managing behavior is often one of the most difficult responsibilities of a sport coach. It is important to remember, however, that the way you practice behavior management can greatly impact your athletes and team either positively or negatively. Think back to some of your sport experiences. Was your coach effective at managing behavior? What methods did he or she use? Was your coach loud and belligerent? Did your coach embarrass you or your teammates in front of everyone? Or did he or she pull you to the side to have a conversation about something you were doing wrong? Which type of discipline do you think is acceptable? Which type do you think is unacceptable? Of course, this is partly a philosophical question, but also one that must be considered when we are discussing abusive coaching. Some coaches really ride the fence on this. They tend to think that discipline should be angry. In actuality, discipline should be consistent, fair, and respectful. Modeling this attitude will produce better results than screaming and berating your players. Sadly, many players are often socialized into thinking that that form of discipline is the way it's supposed to be. Most likely, those players, if they become coaches, will mimic that negative behavior. Negative discipline is typically reactive and is usually related to anger. Anger can occur with coaching personalities when their practice or game plan is disrupted by a player's behavior. When a goal is blocked, we often feel frustration and anger. Coaches without this self-awareness can often react in an explosive way. Think about that for a minute. How do you respond when your objectives are blocked? Listed here are some common types of negative discipline: yelling, lecturing, belittling, intimidation, threats, intentional embarrassment, or any type of physical discipline. Inexperienced coaches might say, "What am I supposed to do if I can't make my players run laps or do push-ups for misconduct?" Before we get to that, let's consider some other things. Harsh comments and negative discipline may prevent misbehavior, but they often create a hostile, negative environment that reduces learning and motivation. The goal about managing misbehavior is to keep it from happening in the first place. With that in mind, how can a coach maintain order? First, keep in mind that discipline and order is not about punishment, screaming, intimidation, or demanding respect. It is about instruction, training, and providing feedback or correcting errors. Positive discipline is proactive and systematic. It is created within a culture as defined by you, the coach, before the season starts. It provides clear structure, limits, and consequences. It is done without anger, and certainly it may take some practice. In general, when creating an environment where good behavior is expected, it is important to incorporate the following into your culture. Form good relationships with athletes. Spend time getting to know them. Use humor. Be vulnerable so they can see that you are human too. Allow athletes to make choices. Be deliberate with this so athletes can see that their ideas matter and they are part of the team. Help young athletes understand the consequences. This will take some extra instruction by the coach. Create a no-blame culture. Each athlete is responsible for his or her actions. Develop trust, respect, empathy, and genuineness. This is by role modeling your expectations, for example, like being on time, and showing commitment. This is a proactive plan, all that can be done before you actually have to spend time and energy managing the misbehavior of an athlete. Positive discipline is more effective, especially with kids. It supports learning and mastery, which is long-term learning. It enhances self-esteem. It improves the team atmosphere, and it reduces problems before they start. This next few slides, we'll describe a particular theory of behavior management. This one is the Cantor model, although there are many other theories of behavior management as well. They all sort of dance around the same ideas. The Cantor model uses a 5-step approach for implementing discipline. First, recognize and remove roadblocks. Second, practice the use of assertive response styles. Third, learn to set limits. Fourth, learn to follow through on limits. And 5, implement a system of positive assertions. So let's briefly explain each step. Step 1 is recognizing and removing roadblocks. It's the coach's responsibility to communicate the appropriate behavior. It should be well communicated that no athlete should be allowed to behave in a self-destructive way that violates the rights of others. Coaches should design positive behavioral expectations and discourage the display of inappropriate behaviors that disrupt the coach or athletes. Step 2 is practice the use of assertive response styles. Cantor and Cantor in 76 identified 3 response style categories when reacting to a behavior: assertive, hostile, and non-assertive. Assertive behaviors refers to those exhibited by the coach in which the coach identifies the expectations clearly and follows through with them. Hostile behaviors displayed by the coach are exhibited when the coach uses discipline to control the students, like punishing the students rather than empowering them, providing them with a choice. Last, the coach may implement a non-assertive approach when expectations are not clear and no apparent leadership is provided. For example, the teacher does not provide the students with behavioral expectations at all. Of course, hostile and non-assertive response styles are not encouraged. Coaches can employ an assertive style within the sport environment to improve their behavior management effectiveness by outlining a set of expectations at the end of the season, as well as at the start of each training session or activity. The third step in the Cantor model is to learn to set limits. Once coaches have identified the inappropriate behaviors, they should then make them apparent to the athlete. After inappropriate behavior has been identified, it is more important to set limits and decide the consequences for being non-compliant. Athletes need to be clearly informed of the expected behavior and the behavior that will not be tolerated. The fourth step is learning to follow through on limits. Action should be taken when students fail to follow instructions. Within the sport context, this step could include coaches making consequences for expected behavior rather than threatening athletes with punishments and not following through. Coaches should establish expectations, select appropriate consequences in advance, and practice verbal confrontations that call for follow-up action. For example, the coach could plan a dialogue to present to athletes when they act inappropriately. The fifth and final step is implementing a system of positive assertions. This highlights the importance of acknowledging children who are behaving appropriately. Strategies for implementing this approach include providing personal attention to the athlete, positive notes to the parents, special rewards and privileges, material rewards, and group rewards. An example in a sport context would be allowing the kids to play a fun game of their choice for good behavior. Consider how Cantor's model fits in application. In step 1, you are to recognize and remove roadblocks using positive behavioral expectations, proactive and recognizing potential issues. The application might be, I expect everyone to keep their hands to themselves and wait patiently for his or her turn. The second one, practice assertive response styles. The application could be, Jack, I'm disappointed in you for using that language. If you continue to speak like that, you'll be removed from the game. Setting limits. Application could be, while waiting in line for your turn, there will be no pushing. If I see anyone pushing, you'll miss your turn and be asked to go to the end of the line. Fourth, learning to follow through on limits. John, I asked you not to push in line and I saw you trying to push your way to the front. You'll now miss a turn and have to go to the end of the line. And finally, implement positive assertions. The coach reinforces positive behaviors by giving affirmations including, well done, clapping at the athlete's performance, and smiling or winking at the athlete. You'll notice that much of behavior management is verbal, assertive, and clearly articulates the expectations and the consequences. Consequences are not getting to play the game or having to sit out, moving to the end of the line or having to miss a turn. Most consequences should be about eliminating opportunity to participate. Truthfully, that is what kids like to do the most. They want to participate and perform to get affirmation. If they aren't awarded the chance, it's far worse than doing laps or push-ups. On that point, when we punish kids with physical exercise, they begin to hate physical exercise, thus defeating the idea of remaining active for life. Exercise should be a positive thing. Not participating in activity in exercise should be a negative. At some point, we got this backwards. When kids do misbehave, consider why. Most likely, kids are feeling discouraged or frustrated about something. There are a myriad of reasons for this. It might not have anything to do with the sport. Do not treat children like mini adults and assume they should have the maturity to be able to put their personal issues to the side. They don't have that capacity. But with consistent behavioral management and showing care and consideration, it is highly possible to maintain. If you must correct behavior, first determine the violation. Second, respectfully request a behavior change. And third, use a consequence if required. Also follow these principles. Handle it as immediately as possible. Do it away from others to minimize the attention effect. Be clear. Be consistent. Do not use anger. Do not carry it forward. Punish the behavior, not the person. Seek to understand the why and know the bigger structure. Some methods to create and use positive discipline include 1. Create your team culture. Establish your expectations. 2. Engage the athletes in the process. Use a team meeting and establish team rules. 3. Set clear team rules. Emphasize the behaviors you expect to see and be clear about those that are not acceptable. 4. Create a team routine. Maybe you establish what time you expect the team to show up to practice and that they will maybe all clean up all the equipment at the end before anyone's allowed to leave. 5. Create engaging practices. This is totally on you, the coach. Your practices should be age appropriate, organized, and fun. This will eliminate time off task and the potential for kids to get into trouble. 6. Catch and reward the positives. Be intentional. It is easy to always catch the mistakes. Purposely catch the positive behaviors. Creating and enforcing rules. One thing to keep in mind is that every rule you make, you must enforce. When I was a collegiate athlete, my coach had only 2 rules. No drinking 48 hours before the game, and don't embarrass the university or the program. I think the intention behind my coach was not to have multiple rules that he had to enforce. Enforcement takes time and lots of energy. The good thing about these rules was that there were only 2 to know. The bad thing was that they were pretty lackadaisical considering the sporting environment, and also the second rule was really vague. You can imagine the number of instances where my coach had to decide whether or not a player had embarrassed the program. Did embarrassment mean getting caught skipping class? Did embarrassment mean getting arrested? Did embarrassment mean wearing a dirty uniform for a home match? There should have been more clarity to these rules so players would clearly understand expectations and so the coach could have a consistent message. When creating rules for your program, try to consider the following. Are the rules specific? Are the rules realistic? Can you back up and enforce the rules? Try to word the rules as a do whenever possible instead of don't. Post the rules where players and parents can see them. Let athletes take part in setting some rules and consequences as appropriate. Share the rules with parents as well so they understand why their child might have to serve a consequence. Some things for coaches to consider when creating rules. Know the league and school guidelines. Understand the expectations of the governing body you're in, whether it is a club, league, or maybe tournament. Design them to shape the behavior you want. Be proactive and use the rules to help shape your team culture. Communicate expectations clearly and set limits. Consider sportsmanship, your philosophy, the culture you want to create, the age and needs of your athletes, and how you want others to view your team. And again, reward those who follow rules. We've mentioned this in the theories of managing behavior. Look for reasons to celebrate good behavior. So what do I need rules for? Here's a starting list. How about for profanity, fighting, interacting with officials and opposing players, destroying team or school property, substance abuse, attendance and promptness, adhering to team dress codes, academic performance, respecting others, complying with sportsmanship guidelines and rules, and respecting authority. Consequences and the importance of rule enforcement. Remember, consequences should be given without anger. If you are unable to control your emotions, walk away and collect yourself before addressing your player. You are the adult. Do not respond with volatility. Be aware of the problems of wiggle room, meaning stay consistent and don't let the player try to negotiate a different consequence or rationalize their behavior. Create consequences that are clear, determine beforehand and explain. They must be fair and reasonable. They must be meaningful to the athlete. You can enlist their help too. Ask them, what do you think is fair? There can be levels, a first offense, a second offense, maybe a third offense. They should not be rooted in embarrassment. This brings us to the end of this lecture on behavior management.